Alrighty, well, welcome everybody, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Andrew Doffney. I'm the Instruction and Outreach Librarian at the New Jersey State Library. Regina Fitzpatrick, our Genealogy Librarian, is also my co-host today, so please welcome her. And finally, our three panelists who have graciously donated their time to talk about their publishing experiences in terms of their genealogy research. Today, we have Karen Alter, Stephen Cohen, and Lou Meixler. So thank you to the three of you for joining us today. A few housekeeping items before we get started. We will be taking your questions throughout the program. Stephen and Karen are doing one part of the presentation, and we'll take questions after their part, and then Lou will be doing the second part, and then we'll be taking questions at the end of that. But please feel free to use the Q&A button to email me there, or even if you can use the chat feature as well. Lou has provided us a handout, and I'm going to post that link in the chat, so you should be able to go and just click on that link and download the handout. It's got a lot of cool little tips and tidbits for you there, so please take a minute and look at that. And as always with our programs, there will be a survey at the end of the webinar, as well as in a follow-up email. If you have time, we always ask that you please complete that. It really does help us move forward with our programming. We want to make sure that we are providing you with the best programming possible. Now, before we jump right in, this is just a quick run through of the Zoom webinar dashboard that you have. This is what it should look like if you're using a laptop or a desktop. If you're using a mobile device, it could look different depending on the device, but all the features will still be there. If you're having any problems, you can always look in the audio settings in the bottom left corner to make sure that your audio is set up correctly. As I mentioned, there is a chat feature, so if you wanted to say anything in chat, you certainly can do that. If you have any problems, you can raise your hand, then I will get in touch with you and hopefully be able to resolve them. And if you do have questions that you want to ask the panelists, please just hit the Q&A button, type in your question, and we'll be happy to answer that for you. So that is everything that I have for you. So I'm going to turn it over to Stephen and Karen.
Okay.
Thank you, Andrew.
Yes, let me make sure I can share the screen. And we're going to share this. And then let me enlarge it. Make sure we got the right size. We got that. And then we can start the show. Okay, so we all see this? Yes, yes.
Looks good.
Okay.
Very good.
Karen, why don't you take it away?
Okay, thank you, Steve. So we're going to talk a bit about the birth of our book. We'll go into a lot more detail about our book, which is actually a genealogy workbook written for primarily a teenaged audience. So we will, on the next slide, talk to you a bit about how we got this idea. And then Steve and I will give you a bit of our background, and we'll talk a little bit more about the book. So we belonged at the same time to Beth El Synagogue in East Windsor. And this was many years ago, about 11 years ago. We started talking about a desire to transmit our love of genealogy to younger people. And we first thought about the children that were in the religious school at the synagogue. Our first idea was to get a giant map, put it on a wall somewhere, and have all the kids indicate with some type of marker where their ancestors might have come from. That was idea number one. We decided that probably wouldn't work that well. Our second idea was to develop some kind of workbook and have the children in the school use this workbook to record different things having to do with their family history. And the more we started thinking about that idea, the more we thought a workbook seemed to make a lot of sense. And that's when we started seriously thinking about writing something and trying to find a publisher for it. So I will let Steve on the next slide talk about his background a bit, and then we'll talk more about our book.
So I happen to have a background in chemistry, but I'm also a writer. I started growing up in the Ewing school system, right next to Trenton, by the way. And in second grade, The standard thing back in, and now you can calculate my age if you care to, is in second grade, the teacher asked everybody to do a project about their family. And so this is the cover of my ancestor booklet from second grade. That's when I started genealogy. I got my A+ on the report, and basically I'm still doing my second grade report ever since then. So I have a few thousand people on my tree. In terms of other writings and sharing with the genealogical world, I did write an article for the Israeli Genealogical Society on my Kantarovich family from the small town of Lachva, which is in southern Belarus. And I have given presentations on genealogy around the USA. So that's a bit of my background in genealogy.
And I'll talk a little bit about my background. And I just wanted to mention that it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you to everyone who is tuning in. I am by day a registered dietitian. I work in a hospital in the areas of wellness and cardiac rehab, but I minored in journalism in college and have done a lot of freelance writing over the years. And I took a course in college, I believe it was in the American Studies department, but I got very interested in my family members that came to the United States from other countries. And I decided to send questionnaires back when I was in college to all my relatives. As you can see, it was very simple. I typed it up. I actually used a mimeograph machine. I have a handwritten family tree diagram on the bottom, and I actually got back a lot of the questionnaires. I still have them to this day. And that's when I got very interested in genealogy. And like Steve, I have done many presentations at the Mercer County Jewish Genealogy Society and at other organizations throughout New Jersey. So just to talk a little bit about our book, we were trying to decide what to call the book, and the phrase "what's in a name" kept coming to us, and we thought that would be an appropriate name for the book, because for many, many people, the first link that they have to their background and their ancestry is their name. They might be named after a relative. That relative might have been living or deceased when they were born. There might be various stories about the person after whom one was named. So we really thought that focusing initially on names would be a good intro to our book and a good title for our book. So if we go to the next slide, you can see this is the name of our book, What's in a Name, a young person's Jewish genealogy workbook. And what's in a name, of course, is a famous quote from Shakespeare. He had said, "What's in a name? That which we call a rose by any other name would smell as sweet." That comes from Romeo and Juliet. So we decided to paraphrase that and use that as part of the name of our workbook. And next came the challenging part, finding a publisher. Steve and I seriously wanted to see if we could find a publisher to publish the book. We would do the writing and all the work, but we wanted to try to see if we could find a publisher to actually publish the book. So in July 2010, we sat down and wrote an introduction chapter. We wrote a sample chapter for our book called Across the Ocean. It actually had 2 parts to it, and we wrote a table of contents. So that was what we did initially. And the second step was writing cover letters to various Jewish book publishers to pitch our idea. And depending on the publisher, we would adjust our cover letters somewhat. And in the next few slides, I'll give you samples of some of our cover letters. I won't read through the entire thing, but just so you get an idea of how persistent and patient one needs to be when you're writing letters to publishers. This took quite a long time before we got a publisher, as you will see. So the first publisher that we emailed was URJ, which stands for Union for Reform Judaism. They, at the time, were publishing books and music. And this is part of our cover letter to them. In red, we proposed to write a genealogy workbook geared toward children ages 11 to 16. This workbook, which would be appropriate for use in the home as well as the classroom, would be informative, easy to read, and fun because children would complete interactive activities in each chapter. When finished, the workbook would be an invaluable family history document for the child. And this was the part that we were very, very interested in. And this is why we wanted to make a workbook. Our feeling was if we included worksheets in the book that these readers could fill out, they would then have a printed document with all this information about their families. The next publisher we contacted, I don't recall hearing anything from the first publisher that we emailed, was called Katav Publishers. So this was a couple of years later in November 2013. We once again wrote another cover letter to this publisher that was based in New York. I believe, did hear back from them at one point, and some of the arrangements that they had for possibly publishing our book included Steve and I investing quite a large amount of money into the publishing of the book. And we decided to see if we could pursue other publishers that would be a more traditional publishing model. So the next publisher that we contacted was the next month, December 2013. This is called Kodesh Press. I don't recall that we received any type of a recognition from them, so we moved on from there. And in June of 2016, we contacted a publisher called Hadassah Word Press. Steve's sister actually had published a book with them previously. They're based in Germany, so we thought, you know, we'll contact them, we'll pitch our story, we'll see what happens. And as you can see here, we sent them a cover letter in June of 2016. The first line was that every book has a story, and we want to enable children to learn about their family stories. And we were successful. We got back this email that said, congratulations, your work, What's in a Name? Children's Genealogy Workbook has been accepted for publication. So that was very, very exciting. That was in 2016. And thereafter, we spent time writing the actual book. And I will hand you over to Steve, and he'll talk about that part of the project.
Thank you. So writing the book, it actually went pretty fast. All the information we had sort of poured out of our heads very quickly. And I would say within a couple of months, we had basically a finished product. So we wrote the manuscript, and we solicited some help from people around the world, from friends and relatives that we knew, because we wanted to include perspectives from around the world. And we also had 4 people review the manuscript to see what their comments were, which would have been an actual teenager, so that was the target audience, a social studies teacher who teaches that particular age, a well-known Jewish genealogist, and a college English professor. So we had 4 people all giving their thoughts and hopes and ideas about what we can adjust in the manuscript. So yeah, it took a village, basically, a shtetl or a village, depending on how you want to look at it. So in the introduction, we decided, because this is a book that the target audience is unlikely to buy by him or herself, it's probably something that a parent or other relative would be likely to give the child. We included a note to the parents about being careful. You know, people, and to this day, you know, there are all stories in the newspaper about people finding through DNA or some other reason that there are some surprising aspects of their family background. For educators, we wanted to tell them, if they wanted to include this as a book for school purposes, that genealogy intersects with a bunch of other areas, such as geography, history, foreign languages. And for genealogists, we wanted to instill in young people a love for genealogy. Most people these days in genealogy seem to be of the senior citizen set. And when you start genealogy when you're a senior citizen, you don't have those ancestors to ask anymore. So start now, ask now while you have the chance. So about the book itself, we do a progression that is typical in the genealogical world. You start from what you know, which is current times, and you work your way backward in the same way that dendrologists count tree rings and they work their way backwards in time as well, or archaeologists uncover layers going backward in time. So we also include clues, like make it sort of like a treasure hunt for the kids. We include worksheets directly in each chapter so they can write down specific types of information, and then it becomes a keepsake for the future. We do emphasize the value in several places in the book of talking to your older relatives and doing it now. The relatives want to tell you their stories. Collect the stories now. Because this is a Jewish genealogy book, and many of the documents or sources that students are likely to come up to will include Hebrew. So we know that many of the people doing this may not know Hebrew. So we considered Hebrew as almost like a secret code language. And here are some keys to, even if you don't know Hebrew, you can match the symbols up and figure out what a gravestone might say or what a marriage document might say. So we give them, we make it into a code and see if you can work out the code. The philosophy of the book itself, it tries to engage students of all different interests. So for the STEM kids, we include codes and computer searching. If you're going to talk to your relatives, how do you record your relatives on audio or video? How do you preserve documents? How do you take pictures, preserve things? So that's the science and technology part. If you want to get kids who are interested in humanities, well, then you talk about history. We have history, we have maps and geography. For kids who like languages, it's necessary in Jewish genealogy. You're going to discover the Russian alphabet, the Hebrew alphabet, perhaps other alphabets as well. And so we talk about alphabets and languages. We want the kids to discover their family stories. And how do we do that? We try to excite them with stories about home customs, for example, songs they might sing, or holiday activities they might do, or even foods. You know, different Jewish foods come from different geographical areas. We try to give them a whole bunch of different topics related to Jewish genealogy, just the whole spectrum. And it's a small book, but we cram a lot in there. And the ultimate goal is not only to record the stories, but give them a sense of pride in their heritage and their Jewish background, even if they may not be Jewish now. Either way. Because we want to show what kinds of documents and artifacts that they may come across, we use our own examples. So we have our own documents, our own gravestones, our own various sorts of items we might have in the house. We even give a separate talk to genealogy groups about all the fun things you might have in your house before you go do the internet search. Everyone wants to go to the internet. You can start in your own house. So we include things like photographs. This is Karen's father, who was a soldier at Fort Monmouth back in the early 50s during the Korean War. Or here's some cousins of mine emigrating to Israel before it was even Israel on a steamship from the old country, from Eastern Europe. Or this is a painting I have in my house of my great-grandmother. And here's a photograph with a little bit of humor at the top. Those of you of a certain age might remember the Ike and Mike comic strip. Well, these are my great uncles, but they were not named Ike and Mike. But it even gives an address and a date: Sutter Avenue in Brooklyn, the old country. So there's all kinds of stuff you might have in your house. Documents. Imagine a marriage contract. It gives the name and dates of the marriage of the bride and groom right there, and the father's names. Don't throw that stuff away. Weird sorts of stuff like junior high school autograph books or wine cups, or Jews tend to have a drawer full of yarmulkes from weddings and bar mitzvahs. Don't throw them away. There's all kinds of stuff printed in them. Postcards, war medals, items that relatives brought over from Eastern Europe, like the mini samovar and the painted spoons, or even membership cards in various organizations. These all give a life to your ancestors, trying to tell the kids these are documents you should hold on to, and give life to your background. We have a whole chapter about how to read grave markers. And this is my great great uncle, buried up in the Catskills in an obscure cemetery. It took me several years to find him because nobody could figure out where the cemetery was. But this gives all kinds of interesting stories about his background right there on the gravestone. Karen can talk about these gravestones that she found in Eastern Europe.
So we were fortunate a few years ago to be able to go to visit the town in which my father-in-law grew up. He lived in Czechoslovakia, which then became Hungary, which then became the Soviet Union, which then became Ukraine. So this was the cemetery associated with the town called Polyana, in which my father-in-law grew up. And we went to this cemetery. It's hundreds of years old. It was very interesting. It's a little hard to tell, but in the photo on the bottom left, you can see the cemetery was on a very steep hill, literally behind the backyard of the house. And the person living in the house had to give us permission to walk through his backyard to get to the cemetery. And when we asked our guide, why would they have a cemetery on such a steep hill? And he said, because they wanted to save the flat land for farming. You know, why waste flat land for a cemetery when you can farm it? So we walked up and around this hill and tried to find some headstones from my husband's family. We didn't find anything specifically, but it was very interesting to look at them. And you can see there are all different kinds of symbols on these grave markers. And this is what we talk about in the book, what the lions might represent, what the crown might represent, what the different Hebrew letters might represent. You can see the grave marker on the left has a snake image. We're not positive what that stands for, but I have read some information that says that sometimes one would see a snake because going from the tail to the head of the snake, it represents the circle of life or the infinity of life, but we're not sure if that's what that represents. But there are lots of clues in the words and the symbols on these grave markers.
So, so not only do we include all kinds of documents, but we also give an important myth-busting alert in the book. It's common, it's sort of common fairy tale story that when people came to America, and this is not just true only for Jews, but for various other ethnic groups that came around the turn of the 20th century, that they were given new names when they came through the ports, especially Ellis Island. Often the story might be some big burly Irish guard said to me, no, your name can't be insert long Slavic kind of a name here, and it's got to now be Jones. Well, you know, that's not true. There's no evidence for that. It couldn't have happened. The clerks had no time to deal with that. They were just happy to get the people through their checking off the list when they came in. So we try to also give a little bit of the real story behind immigration to America. We also included some tools in the book for the students to do their own genealogy, the toolkit that you might say we need. So yes, websites are important. This is the golden age of genealogy with websites galore of all kinds of places. We include some of these as well as many others in the back of the book. We include a glossary because there are a lot of peculiar terms, not only to genealogy, but to Jewish genealogy in particular, about one's background. And so we include a fair number of words. This is also useful if the book will be used in an educational setting. So Karen can talk about the book actually getting published now.
Thank you, Steve. So as you recall, we first got the idea to publish this book in 2010. So it was a 7-year process. Our book was eventually published in March of 2017. And as you can see from this slide, this is what our book looks like. I'll also hold it up for everyone to see. It's very exciting to have published this book. Our publisher, as we mentioned, is based in Germany, and the book is available on a website in Europe called morebooks.de, and it's available on Amazon. And our publisher did print some of these flyers and promotional materials for us to use. We have heard, as we've gone around the state and other parts of the country talking about our book, that adult beginner genealogists have also found the book to be helpful. Since we were writing it for teenagers, we tried to make it very reader friendly and understandable. And we've had some adults buy the book and tell us that they found it helpful as well. So even though it was intended for teenagers, certainly adults can use it as a resource. And these are just a few reviews that we were happy to see. The Jewish Book Council reviewed our book. That's on the right. There's a review on the upper left from Amazon, and another review from Goodreads on the bottom left.
So selling the book, how does one sell a book? Well, we had to market the book, and we had to market ourselves, of course. So we took our own picture there, set up a camera outside on the front porch, and pushed the timer and ran back behind the lens there. And so we designed bookmarks that we could hand out as a promotional material. So this is a bookmark that we had printed using some online company that you upload the image, and then they print it and mail it back to you for a small fee. The options for, as Karen mentioned, for buying the book, so for some unknown reason, you can only get the color book online through morebooks.de, which is sort of the one of the feeder places that markets the Hadassah WordPress books. Amazon, if you want to get it, they sell it, but it's only a black and white version. We are not sure why that is, but it is what it is, and there we are. So then Karen can tell you something that happened within the past couple of years.
Right, so very unexpectedly, as we mentioned, our publisher was called Hadassah WordPress. Steve, in November of 2019, got an email saying, guess what? We have a new name for our publishing house. It has been rebranded, and it is now called Kodesh Press. And all of a sudden, we had a new editor with whom we had not worked. So that was a little bit of a surprise. And as you can see, there's a new website. So instead of Hadassah WordPress, it's HakodeshPress.com. So we had to reconfigure a little bit. We had some books in our possession that were from the old publisher, and now we have some books in our possession from the new publisher. And that, I guess that's something that you have to just adjust to, because it happens sometimes in the publishing world. So these are new flyers from the new publisher. The book looks essentially the same on the cover, but the imprint of the publisher is a little different. And as Steve mentioned, it's still available on Amazon and through More Books. And Steve, I'll just mention also that when we printed the bookmarks, pre-COVID, when we did a lot of book talks in conjunction with our presentations, we would stick a bookmark in the book when we sold the book to somebody. Yep. And we were hoping that the bookmark would be useful, and it was just a way for them to remember our book as well. And in terms of challenges, we did mention that our publisher is from Germany, which means that when we sell our book here, we have to constantly check the euro to US dollar conversion rate, because that could influence how much we need to charge for the book, which could be a little challenging. Steve mentioned that for whatever reason, our publisher has a less expensive black and white version of the book on Amazon. The color version is on the publisher's website, and we sell the color version when we go to meetings. Another bit of a challenge is that we need to do all of our own marketing. We contacted bookstores ourselves, so our publisher did not get our book into any bookstores. It's on Amazon and just on the publisher's website. We did not have a lot of success with getting local bookstores to carry our book, so we're still working on that. And that's why Steve and I do a lot of genealogy presentations throughout the state and even in other areas. And often at the end, we'll get permission to discuss our book a bit. And if people are interested in buying our book, we'll do that at our presentations. Of course, that's been curtailed because of the COVID pandemic. As mentioned, we have traveled near and far to do these presentations. And one new thing that I had to learn was to file quarterly taxes for our book. We have to keep track of our book sales and any sales tax that we've charged. Steve, I think on one of the slides previously, we mentioned at one time we got Square to use on Steve's phone because we realized it became a little difficult to expect people to have the exact right amount of cash on hand to buy our book, and people don't always carry checkbooks anymore. So we had to adapt to the 21st century, and we got Square to use for credit card purchases as well.
Yeah, the magic of Google Docs and spreadsheets for the quarterly taxes, keeping track of all income and outgo and all that kind of stuff. We turned into like
so Steve
mini
is the
CEOs.
spreadsheet. Yeah. He's the keeper of the spreadsheet, and I am the filer of the quarterly taxes. And the reward is certainly the wonderful feeling of accomplishment that comes from having this idea back in 2010 and going through all the steps to have it finally published. It's very exciting. It still is to this day. We certainly are so thrilled to hear when people contact us and tell us that they enjoyed reading the book, or they gave it to their grandchildren, or it was useful to them or helpful in some way. And going forward, we do own the copyright to our book. We could consider doing an electronic version of our book if that seems like the way to go at some point. We could consider looking into a publisher that's based in the United States that could possibly help get our book into more bookstores. These are all ideas that we have, and we'll see what happens as we go forward. But we wanted to thank you so much for your attention, and we're happy to take any questions if anyone has any.
All right, thank you so much, Steve and Karen. If anybody does have questions, again, you can use the Q&A box. You can use the chat feature, and they'll be happy to answer them. So we got a few coming in, so we can jump right in. First one, can you discuss the physical preparation of your document, such as editing, font, page numbers?
Yes. So in terms of the physical preparation, when we were creating the book in its final format, at that time I was working for a company, and they had asked me to use InDesign to design a book for them. So luckily I had just learned the process of InDesign and book layout. And so I had created created the entire layout of the book with pages and index and table of contents and everything, and the fonts and everything like that. So that I created. The ultimate answer was I created the manuscript, the final manuscript in InDesign, exactly as it would appear in the final book layout. I just had to contact Hadassah WordPress at the time and ask them for the physical specifications, what the size of the page was and what the size of the printed area on the page would be, and so forth.
What does the editor to do, and what kind of relationship do you have with the editor?
You want me to answer that one, Steve?
Sure, yeah, sure, why
Okay.
don't you?
So the interesting thing about this publisher is our editor was very helpful. We emailed her a lot. With this particular publisher, the editor really didn't do any editing. Basically, we submitted the book exactly the way we wanted it to be and to look, and that's how it was printed. So they essentially do on-demand printing. I think as people order copies of this book, they print copies of it. So there are clearly some publishers out there that have editors that look at your chapters, look at your writing, make suggestions, are more hands-on. For this particular publisher, the editor worked with us on more of the logistics of getting the book published, but did not actually change anything that we wrote or give suggestions on how to write it. So we had to be very, very careful that we submitted it exactly the way we wanted it to be. And Steve and I are very meticulous about our research and being very accurate. So we couldn't rely on anyone else to do that and to fact check things. We submitted it exactly the way it was published.
Yeah, I would add that I think Lou is going to talk a little bit about copyright, but that's an important aspect of publishing these books, making sure you have permission from non-public domain sources as to what items you can print. And we sent a fair number of emails to certain places. And went back and forth as to whether we had permission to publish, say, a yearbook photo or an immigration document that we found on Family Search or something like that.
And of course, any images of medals or documents or forms that we got from friends and relatives, we asked their permission to put them in the book.
Yeah, so this is one weird thing we learned, that if you want to show, for example, a British or Canadian birth, a civil record, like a birth or death certificate, those forms are owned by the Crown, Queen of England, Crown copyright. And you have to get permission from the Queen or her representatives to publish them. Now, it's a pro forma thing. You just email, there's a particular website, and you just tell them what you want to do, and they say, sure, go ahead, we don't care. But technically, those documents in the Commonwealth are owned by the Queen, and it's not like the US where these documents are public domain. It's very strange.
Interesting.
What is the percentage of sales made at conferences?
Probably most of them, I would say, or a fair proportion.
I guess the question is, how much do we make per book when we sell it at conferences? Is that?
Or I would interpret as how many books out of all the books we sell are sold at conferences, or maybe meetings.
Oh,
or
I
something.
see. Mm-hmm.
I think it's most of them, doubtlessly most of them.
Yes,
yeah.
yes. Yeah, so that's our primary way of selling our book. We do presentations at different places and bring copies of our book with us. And just so that you know as well, which is a different interesting piece of information, we probably make a few dollars per book. Because we purchase the books ourselves from our publisher and then sell it for a slightly higher amount of money. So we're right, Steve, probably making several dollars per book, yep. Depending on the exchange rate for the euro.
Have you gotten any response or indication from your audience on what activity or portion they enjoyed most about the book? And has anyone shared any cool stories with you about things they found out as a result of following instructions in the book?
Cool stories.
Yeah, I would think people seem to like the part about names. We get a lot of questions about family names, right, Steve? And I think
and when we give talks, we often ask about what sort of items you have in your house that you might use. And people come up with all sorts of interesting items that they can use in their genealogy. It might be anything from a candlestick to a photograph to a document. Yeah, there's all kinds of interesting questions about that.
Uh, do you cover where to start organizing family material? I have dozens of physical documents and gigabytes and thousands of digital files. Sometime soon I'd like to do a Zoom calls with my family from here in New Jersey to Alaska and show them around my digital archive.
So we do have a chapter in the book toward the end on preserving materials. There's one picture in there where I took of the bookshelf with all the that I have in my house with all the loose leaf notebooks, and just rows of loose leaf notebooks. It's like a mini library in itself. But so we talk a little bit about preserving that. So there is a little bit about that. I'll just say there is a little bit about that kind of thing. Is there anything you want to say, Karen?
Yeah, it certainly can be overwhelming in terms of organizing all this material. I think if we were to do a second edition of our book, we would probably update it even more with some ideas for digitizing a lot of the materials. But we do talk about some basic way of using archival quality sleeves and things to preserve photos in, and ways to save it on computers, and preserving movies and tapes and things like that. But certainly there's a lot of good information online as well about how to preserve and organize those kinds of things. It's a good question.
All right, well, looks like that's all the questions we have for you, Stephen and Karen, right now. But if anybody does has questions, please, if you think of something, please send them. We're going to move over to Lou to make sure we get Lou's perspective, and then we will take more questions at the end of Lou's presentation.
Okay. Let's see. Let's see. Wait a minute. Where's my? Oh, yeah. Okay, hold on. I gotta just go back to the beginning and share screen. Let's see. And let's see. Okay, can you see that?
Looks good.
Okay. All right. So my talks. Well, first of all, thank you to Andrew and Regina, and thank you, Steve and Karen, for your excellent presentation. So my story is a little bit different. So mine is a story about publishing a family memoir. So the origin of the memoir was this. My wife's father, Isidore Weiss, was born in 1908, and he grew up in Ukraine. And in 1928, when he was here in the United States, he wrote a memoir of his life as a college project. He typed it out on a typewriter with a lot of carbon copies. Sadly, he passed away in 1991. And by around 2008, which would have been around his 100th birthday, most of the copies had been disappeared or misplaced by family members. I don't know if you can see this, but so this is what the memoir looked like. It's just a bunch of Xerox pages of carbon copies. So fortunately we had a full book, and we had all 47 pages, and it was 15 chapters. And the book kind of looked like the image that you could see there. It's kind of old and starting to fade and things like that. So his memoir was 15 chapters, and started out from when he was 5 years old in the summer of 1912 to when he was 12 years old around September 1920, when they finally were able to emigrate to America. So these are the topics of his chapters. And the first thing that happened was my daughter was then a PhD student at Cornell, and she had access to a fast scanner. So she said, I'm going to make a deal with you, Dad. Do you copyright this? Because I'm a registered patent agent. She said, copyright it, and I'll make a PDF file. And you can use the PDF file to apply for the copyright. So we copyrighted it, My wife's mother, Isadore's wife, was still alive, and so we made her the owner of the copyright. Once we had it copyrighted, we felt we were able to then circulate it to other people because now we had it protected by the copyright. So we had a helpful connection. Around the same time that this happened, a colleague, friend of mine, Professor Eamon Doherty, who's at Fairleigh Dickinson University, mentioned that he had just published a book, which was a memoir of his uncle Bob, who was in the US Army, 1945, and they send him right into Nagasaki, like weeks after they dropped the atomic bomb and Japan surrendered to the in World War II. So he runs around all over the place, takes lots of photographs, writes notes, and Eamon, Professor Doherty, said, this is an important book, and it's got photographs that no one else has seen, so he felt it was important. So he and other academics at Fairleigh Dickinson University published the book. So I have a copy here, and so I said to him, we also have a book in our family. This is Memoir, which has some historical significance. And my father-in-law lived through the period of the Russian Revolution. And, I can send it to you. So he wrote back to me. He wrote that I sent him a PDF copy. He sat down, he read it, he couldn't put it down in one writing. He said it was significant and important. And I mentioned to him that even in 1928, there was a publisher who was willing to publish it, but they were going to edit it. And my father-in-law was a kind of a difficult guy to deal with. He didn't like change. And he said, you can print it, but you can't change one word. And the editor said, no deal. So it wound up being on the shelf for the next 80 years. So Professor Doherty says, let me see if I can get some other people involved. We should publish this. But he said, the Russian Revolution to the young kids today is like talking about, the 30-year war. And they don't have any clue who's fighting. They don't have a clue what happened. He says, I will get other academics involved, contributing authors, and they will provide some more background information. So, in fact, we said, okay, that's fine. And interestingly, at the time, a movie came out called Dr. Zhivago, and it talked about what happened during this time. Reds. There was actually a movie called Reds. It was actually the one I should be talking. I took my father-in-law to see it. He said what they portrayed in that movie was so accurate to what he experienced in Ukraine during the Russian Revolution. It's just kind of an interesting comment that he made. He described life in the town of where he grew up called Minkovitz, which I think is pretty close to a town that some of Steve Cohen's family came from, Zhytomyr, which is very close by, also in Ukraine. And tremendous amount of fighting occurred in his town, my father-in-law's, because it was a main thoroughfare. And he also has a chapter where he gets locked up in the synagogue all alone at night in his town. And, he's terrified because there's no lights, he's locked in. And I'll come back to that a little bit later. Anyway, so we had a team that came together through the efforts of Dr. Doherty, and they're going to contribute background material for the book. So they come together and they're going to talk about what, some of the history of the area and other things like that. And we're all excited about this, and this is going to happen. And then the team comes apart. Why? Well, it turns out that some of the academics attempted to join the team basically to kind of expand their list of publications. And my wife, Deb, and I looked at some of the things that they wanted to put into the book. And we said, this stuff is incidental. It's not related. It would more detract. So we said, no, we're not going to accept that. So Professor Doherty said, he said, I can't object to my colleagues' contributions. I won't lead this effort anymore. Deb and you are on your own. So now we're going to do the big book on our own. So we take over the publication. So we said, okay, some of these academics we don't want, but others are very valuable. So we're going to keep those. So we deleted some, kept the others. Then we added family photos. We had some genealogical documents, immigration records, CHIPS passenger lists, census records. We put in a family tree. We interviewed my wife's mother. And then I did some more research. So I found some pretty interesting information on something called a Yiska book. A Yiska book were books that survivors of towns in Europe after World War II put together kind of as a memoir of their town or their province or whatever. So I actually found a copy of a Yiska book for the province of the area that contained the town, Minkowitz, called Kamenets Podolsky, in the library at Princeton University in Russian, but it was there. Oh, I'm sorry, it was in Yiddish. There was other information I was able to get on jewishgen.org, Encyclopedia Judaica, Yad Vashem. So I decided I would write a chapter on the province and also a chapter on the town. The other thing was my father-in-law, you'll find this of almost every immigrant of that period, they remember the ship they came on, the name of the ship, and the date they arrived. And so I said, I will find out about the ship. My father-in-law kept on saying the ship was the Arbiter. I said, Arbiter, that's in German, that means work. Well, I couldn't find anything about the Arbiter. And finally I said to him, could you please write it out? It was Orbiter, Orbita. So sure enough, Ellis Island website, they had a picture of the ship. So now the problem was get the memoir that was typewritten with some hand corrections and things like that into a format that we could use for the publication. So we used something called OCR, which is optical character recognition. But there was a problem because some of the letters just came out wrong. It couldn't read some of the letters. Finally, near the end, I said, the only way I'm going to get this right is I'm going to retype the entire memoir verbatim, exactly the way he wrote it, exact format. And so that's exactly what I did. And that became part one of the book. Part two then was a section that was actually written by Isidore Weiss himself on an award that he received from the B'nai B'rith Foundation, entitled What Judaism Means to Me. We interviewed his wife. That became part three. Dr. Amen interviewed her, and she gave us a chapter about that. Turned out we had recorded my father-in-law's recollections on tape. So we had a number of tapes. And so Eamon Doherty very generously went through the tapes, and he excerpted some of the information that we were able to get out of those tapes. And that became part four. Let's see, hold on a second. Part five was we added family photos, immigration information, a family tree. We actually wanted to create a document that our family will have for basically forever. And then the academics added social, political, geographic information. I put in some information about using the Yiska books, also information about the towns and the province. Eamon added a section on the process of putting a book like this together, and then finally an acknowledgement. So let me just, this is what the book looked like when we finally got done. I don't know if you can see the book. I'll hold it up, but it's a very, kind of a nice, you can see, it's a pretty good sized book. And this is the cover. And the publisher gave us an ISBN number. It's in the Library of Congress and so forth. So just to recap, early immigration, photos, interviews, family information, geography, history, so forth. One of the things we found very helpful is that we put in maps. Steve mentioned about copyrights, but any maps that are owned by the U.S. government is automatically available. So we used maps from the map library at Princeton University. We found some very detailed maps. This is one that just shows where the province was and where the river was, where they had to escape one night going across the river. Immigration information, listing the family. This is my father-in-law. He's 12 years old. His name is Isidore, but here it's like actually has a photo of him and his brother and older sister. It looks to me like they just sent this older sister, who's about 16, and the two kids, 12 and 13, to the United States on their own. It's amazing. Some awards that my father-in-law got when he was in college. This is his father, who came here first, and then he died 2 years after he arrived. So the family was kind of on their own once they got here. Of course, the father had passed away. This is a picture of the family. Isidore's on the right. His older brother is in the middle, and his sister. This is my mother-in-law's wedding, 1935, the whole family getting the award that we mentioned. Now, this was the family in 1994. So this is the whole family. This is my father-in-law and my mother-in-law in 1980. My mother-in-law, about the time we had the book. She participated. She was in her 90s, and she participated in the book fairs. Family tree. So this was the book, the picture of the orbiter, the ship that my father-in-law came over from Ellis Island. But I was able to find a better picture on a postcard. This is a contemporary postcard. And this is what Author House, our publisher, used for the book cover, using it with a false coloring. So they did a really great job. Immigration. So I mentioned about the synagogue that my father-in-law got locked into when he was like about 10 years old. And I actually found this in the Iska book. And this is the actual picture of the synagogue. It's written in Yiddish, or maybe this is Hebrew actually. And it says this is a group of Jews in front of the old synagogue, which is the one that he mentioned. Another map that we use to get more pinpoint the location of Minkowitz. This is interesting. This was the walled city of Kamenets-Podolsky from a 16th century drawing. And if you look at the upper right-hand corner, looking in towards the picture, you notice there's a square turret and two round turrets. Here it is today, square turrets, and two round turrets. So it's the same walled city. My father-in-law mentioned in his memoir that Pet Laura was the person who instigated many of the pogroms. And he said even 80 years later, he would wake up with nightmares about this Pet Laura and the pogroms that he caused. We had book signings. We had one at Meadow Lakes where my mother-in-law lived. We had one at Fairleigh Dickinson. We invited a lot of people to the book signings using postcards. So we got a lot of participation that way. That's pretty much the story of getting a memoir into publication. Anybody have any comments or questions? Happy to take them now. And we finished on time.
Thank you so much, Lou.
Thank you.
All right. So if anybody does have any questions, please feel free to send them. What's the most valuable thing you learned about working with collaborators?
You have to stay in control. You have to be very selective. We had stuff, I gotta tell you. I don't know if Eamon's on one of the participants. I asked him if he'd like to join, but some of them put things in that were just totally irrelevant. They were detrimental to, I think, the overall story. So be selective and don't, some of them, some of the contributions were really terrific. In particular, I remember Pat Schuber wrote a history of the period that I had never read before. Really great. Other, participation was great. Some of them, you just make sure you don't accept anything that you don't think will be an addition to the book.
How long did it take once you had the idea?
Fast. I think we got this into publication within less than 6 months. I got to tell you, proofreading. So, we had this OCR thing, we retyped that, then we had all this, these contributions, all different type fonts, all different margins. So we had to get everything all coordinated. We did it in Microsoft Word. Eamon's mother, God bless her, she proofread it. She gave it to us. My wife is a very good proofreader. We must have gone through it 4 times on our own. And every time we go through, we'd find mistakes. And finally, we went through it entirely. I remember we were on vacation. I brought my Mac Plus with me when we were working on it. And we did it, I went all the way through. Everything was good. I said, I think it's ready to go. So I said, let me just do a word check, the automatic word check, one more time. What it did was it changed Kamenetz Podolsky everywhere to Kamenetz Poodles. So just be careful about word check, because it could really throw you a curveball. But it was fast, and Author House was great. It wasn't very expensive. I don't think it cost more than about $400 to get it published. They did all of, they corrected any formatting errors. They did that cover. They let us retain the copyright. Oh, I got to tell you one more thing. For that, we also have a digital. So you can download the book, but you can also go on their website and download a digital version for, a lot less. So the book was selling for $12 or $10 or something. The other, was, we weren't doing it to make any money. And believe me, we didn't make any money. And once a year, my mother-in-law would get a check of royalties for like, $15, but that was the idea. The idea was to capture this memoir. And we have kids now who are, 3rd generation, who are reading the book and saying, wow, I didn't know this, about grandpa, or great grandpa, So anyway, that's what we did.
How many copies did you print? Who was the intended audience? And did you have to underwrite the printing, or did the publisher?
We paid for the printing. We printed about 200 books, I think, to begin with. And we gave out, we sold a lot of them at these book fairs. I still have about a dozen books. We gave them out to family members. And everyone, and Fairleigh Dickinson, by the way, used the book in their Jewish studies program. So they actually sold some copies that way. But we actually paid for the publication. So it's self-published in a sense. But we really, of all the publishers around, Eamon, who had already used Author House, said, he found working with them was the easiest, the best, and fast. They did it very, very quickly. And they have them, as Karen mentioned before, it's on demand. So they can supply one book, 50 books, 100 books, whatever you want, on demand.
All right. Did you have the visa in your possession, or did you find it online? Maybe the Russian passport?
I think we may have had that in our possession. No, I don't recall. It could have been online too. But I'm going to take a guess. I think it was in our possession.
Did your publisher help
Actually, a correction. It was a Romanian passport. They had to sneak out of Ukraine. They weren't allowed to leave until the kids did their military service. 12 and 13, they had to stick around. So they snuck across the border, 2 attempts, once they got arrested. Once they got to Romania, then they were able to emigrate to America.
Did your publisher help get the book into bookstores?
Absolutely. They got, not bookstores, but online. It's on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, and on their website, but not, they didn't get them into bookstores.
Alrighty, well, we can give it a minute, see if anybody else has any other questions, but just a word to everybody. This program is being recorded, so you can definitely get a copy of it in a follow-up email that I'll be sending out. So if there's anything you missed, it'll be available for you on demand. You can watch it whenever from our YouTube channel. So look out for that. Where in Romania did your family end up?
I think they wound up in Bucharest, and then from there they immigrated through, I think, Liverpool, England, and then to the United States.
How did you handle copyright issues with online documents?
Actually, the online documents that we used were, I think they're pretty much available. We only used immigration information, maps, which were in the public domain, and everything else we had was like family information. I should mention one thing, by the way. We didn't use it in the book, but I have it. In World War II, the United States Air Force did aerial mapping of all of Europe. And Minkowitz, there's a map of Minkowitz that's down to the street level. And they show individual houses. And where there's a church, they actually have a house with a little cross on top. And yeah, I thought about using that, but I didn't know which house was there, so I figured, okay, I really can't use it. But the map room at Princeton University, which I think is open to the public, has these unbelievable detailed maps that both the Allies made, and also I think some that the Germans made. So if you're interested in maps, that's an incredibly interesting place to look.
Alrighty, well, it looks like that is all the questions that we have. So a link for the map.
A link for the map?
Let's see here.
Which map are you, was that a question to me about the map?
I believe so.
Which map are we talking about?
Where did you find the map online?
Oh, yeah, I'd have to look and see if I can remember. You know, it's been 10 years, so I think one of them I used, just used a map from MapQuest. And I wrote to them and asked them if there was any problem using it. And I got like a standard thing back, like if I'm not using it for, you know, to create money, if I'm just using it for my own purposes, that's okay. So one of them was MapQuest, and I don't remember the other one, but I think the other one was one of the government sites for maps.
Alrighty, well, I think we can go ahead and end it there. So I'd just like to thank you, all of you, Stephen, Karen, Lou, for sharing some fantastic information. It's definitely a tricky subject, but I think you've provided some great insight into the entire process. So
Thank you for having us.
And thank you. Yes.
Thank you for having us, Regina and Andrew.
Yes. Okay.
all right. Well, as I mentioned, look out for the recording that will be to come with this, as well as a attachment of Lou's handout that he provided. So, and I always like to end with be safe, be well, and hopefully we can see you soon.
Okay. Thank you again, Andrew, for hosting. Thank you, Regina.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure.
Okay, bye.